Here's 5 ways the church harmed me as an autistic child growing up. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I'm a comedian, and if you come to my channel looking for serious content all the time, it's not always going to be this serious. And also, I'm a Christian. I don't have anything against Jesus. I have a lot against people who use Jesus as an excuse to hurt people. But also, I know that a lot of the stuff I'm about to talk about isn't necessarily evil or intentional. I'm making this video for people who just want to know how to support autistic people in their churches. So it's not going to be like all super dark. Some of it's more practical application stuff. So now you know. The first thing I'm going to talk about is peace and the peace of God being attributed to stillness. Now, as an autistic, I need to move. Even while I'm making this video, I'm moving my feet. You can't see it. I'm sitting on the floor. I'm moving my fingers. I'm tapping my fingernails together. It's a very basic part of who I am and how I function as a person. However, in church, I constantly saw holiness equated to stillness. All the photos and artworks, stained glass, whatever, of holy people were always very still and posed and poised. And as an autistic, I happen to be jittery, wiggly, and clumsy. So I constantly felt this unintentional message that I was not good enough because I needed to move to be able to think clearly. I thought that, I guess, once you are at peace with God, you don't move. But I would argue that spiritual peace and even emotional peace doesn't necessarily mean physical peace. Like, have you ever gone hiking in the mountains? It's one of the most peaceful experiences you can ever experience. It's so calm and relaxing. It's beautiful. The air feels amazing on your skin. Sometimes you work out deep emotional issues because you can finally just clear your head, but you're walking the whole time. And when you get home, you're going to be super sore because you exerted yourself physically a lot, but emotionally and mentally, you were at peace. So I think that's an important distinction to make. And some ways you can maybe help prevent autistic kids from thinking that is maybe just tell them, peace doesn't mean standing still. You can bounce around. And there are lots of times in the Bible where people danced, mentioning those as like an expression of holiness for those people, an expression of worship. It can really be a great support for autistic kids. I loved to worship God through dance, and it definitely made me an outsider growing up in my church. I felt very lonely in that aspect. Like I was making some sort of doctrinal stand just by wanting to worship in a way that didn't make me miserable. Okay, the second thing I have to talk about is the level of out of control that church can be for autistic people sensory wise. I feel like every church has a certain kind of worship they really love. Maybe it's really peaceful and slow with hymns and an organ, or maybe it's super upbeat with like laser light show and smoke machines. And there's nothing wrong with either of those. The issue is that for autistics, laser light show can be like out of control, but maybe even the organ worship can be out of control because maybe there's a squeaky key that they keep hearing it and it's bothering them. But what are they supposed to do about it? You can't just walk out of the service. You can't just sit down. You can't just like rock around because some people will think that's disrespectful, at least in the churches I've been to. And that's very difficult because I guess what I'm saying is churches tend to have an aesthetic that they put together, and there is nothing wrong with that. But as autistics, we tend to have more specific needs as to what we can be comfortable with and what we can focus with. So I think a good way to help autistics in your church in regards to sensory needs is have more than one way to worship and experience the service. So maybe there's an overflow room that's very clearly stated. If you want to walk around in the back or something, that's totally okay. Don't just assume they know. Remember, autistics need blunt, straightforward communication. So just say, like, if you are someone who doesn't like the music to be as loud, go to the overflow room or something like that, or even just having the option to worship virtually, because there are times I can go out in public and do group events and it's fine. But if I've had a really rough week, I'm already super low on my resources and church could just push me over the edge to a meltdown. And no one wants to go worship Jesus and then feel sick to their stomach and cry for an hour, especially if it's not necessary. So having a virtual option is, I think, always a good call for inclusivity. Okay, the third issue I need to talk about is more of a larger issue regarding especially autistic kids. But like I alluded to earlier, blunt communication is the autistic way. Of course, all autistics are different. I gotta say that every time I talk about autism, because people are like, I know an autistic who's not like you. Of course, there's a lot of us. We're not Smurfs. We're all different. We all have different personalities and different preferences. However, as a whole, autistics tend to favor blunt, direct, straightforward communication, which errs on the side of being rude. Meanwhile, people who aren't autistic tend to favor more obtuse, I don't want to say convoluted, but people who aren't autistic tend to err on the side of being a little confusing, on just suggesting things and hinting at things. I always say that when autistic communication goes too far, it becomes an insult. But when non-autistic communication goes too far, it becomes a 90s rom-com. Because we've all seen those movies where there's some scene where just one adult conversation with a direct question would have solved everything because she overheard a sentence out of context or whatever, but she doesn't want to ask her true love this one straightforward question, so she changes her phone number and moves to France or something. So that's what I'm getting to here. In a lot of times, especially for autistic kids growing up, the only way they know how to communicate is the way that's written into their brain. Blunt, straightforward, direct. And that's fine. But the only way other people know how to communicate is more gentle and subversive, which leads to autistic kids being seen as rude when genuinely they don't know any other way to talk. And they're constantly learning to try to backtrack their words and try to reach that level of communication, even though it's more difficult. So it leads to kids being constantly confused and knowing that they cannot speak their mind or ask the questions they need to ask without being seen as disrespectful or rude or antagonistic or argumentative. Now, this in the church especially can become even worse because a kid can ask a question and it can be seen as rude, but because the question was about God, then it will be perceived as that kid being against God. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you were teaching a story about Noah's Ark, how God flooded the earth. And someone might say, a non-autistic kid might say something about, why did God flood the earth? That's just a normal question for kids, right? But an autistic kid might be even more direct and say something like, well, why did God flood the earth when he could have used fire? That doesn't make sense. That seems weird. Now to the autistic kid saying that seems weird seems perfectly reasonable because to them, it does seem weird. It doesn't make sense. But to a teacher, they might understand that is, God's stupid, I'm smarter than God, which is not at all what the kid is saying. And for the record, even if the kid was saying it, it's a kid. Kids are weird. Calm down. Some teachers get mad really easily when kids are just being children, but that's beside the point. So this child, to them, is asking the same question as the other kid. In fact, they've even added more details. Not only do they not understand why God flooded the earth, but they think that it would have been more cost efficient or time efficient or practical to use fire, maybe because it's faster or something. To the kid, they're not just asking a question, but they're really engaged. They're thinking about the story. They're seeing what parts they don't understand. They're trying to see it from their perspective. I would just use fire. And so they're actually super engaged with the story and wanting to learn more. But a teacher might see that as the kid saying that they're smarter than God and punish the kid or lecture the kid or correct the kid or tell the kid to be quiet, which will humiliate the child in front of their friends and make them feel like God's angry at them and they're not allowed to ask questions about God. Now, obviously, this can be an issue because not every kid who's autistic gets diagnosed very early. I didn't get diagnosed till I was an adult, and it was a shock, but at the same time, it totally made sense because I was doing stuff like this my whole childhood. There were so many times in church when I was asking genuine questions. I really wanted to know answers about God, and I was punished for it. Maybe not directly punished, but a long lecture in front of your friends really does feel like punishment. So I would say a good way to make your church more inclusive to autistics, especially autistic children in that sense, is to just give kids the benefit of the doubt in their question. If a question seems rude and argumentative, don't assume that the kid is against God. Sometimes kids, autistic or not, seem rude when they're just passionate. So I hate to be so broad with this one, but at the end of the day, it just comes down to patience. Because whether the kid is autistic or not, you're gonna meet some weird kids. And just assuming that all of them are gonna think and communicate in the same way is doing a disservice. Okay, God made us all special, God made us all unique. And at the end of the day, you just gotta be patient with kids. And if they ask a question, just assume it's a real question. Just give the benefit of the doubt. And this goes for adults too in adult classes. Don't assume someone's disrespecting God. Just answer the question. It really isn't that hard. And if you don't have an answer to the question, then you can admit it. It's really okay. If I ask someone a question and they say, I don't know the answer, I'm not going to be like horrified and to discover that this person does not in fact know everything on the planet. Really. I'm not going to be shocked like, oh, they don't know everything? No. In fact, I'm going to appreciate how straightforward and not obtuse your response was. Hey, why didn't God use fire? I don't know. Okay, valid answer. Valid answer. It's okay to admit you don't know things, and it's okay to follow along with some weird questions. Sometimes the best lessons come from weird questions. Okay. Fourth way that church can be harmful and was harmful to me personally as an autistic kid was required methods of interaction. I don't need to spend long explaining this. It's pretty basic, just that I thought differently from other people. I functioned differently from other people, but a lot of times required events required me to do certain things. Everyone's going to get together and do this certain activity together all at once. And then we're going to do this other activity. All I got to say is, it is okay for a kid to sit in the corner reading a book sometimes. It is okay to set up a couple of board games in a corner and let kids do their own thing. That's not to say that like you should give up on all structured events like camps and stuff. But if there's only one way for kids to interact, there's going to be some kids who just fall through the cracks and don't make any friends. There's just going to be some kids who fall through the cracks and don't make any friends because, like for me, the bane of my existence in church growing up was dodgeball. Because as an autistic, now I know there are some autistics who love dodgeball. Like I said, we're all different. But for me, I had to be so alert for the dodgeballs coming at me that I was in this constant state of overwhelm. I couldn't calm down and I would go hide like in this nook in the wall and cry. And then I'd get like the teacher would find me, and the teacher of course was like some college guy who meant well but didn't have great interaction skills for 10-year-old girls, and would be like, stop crying loudly, and then people would laugh at me, and it just became an overwhelming and humiliating experience because I just literally did not have the capacity to be able to cope with all those balls flying at my face. It just wasn't something my brain was set up for at 10 years old. And then I went to a volleyball camp one time, and that was even worse. I got home after the first class and cried for an hour. That's unrelated. I'm just saying. The point is, you can give kids more than one option for how to interact, and they'll tend to be a lot happier. And that doesn't have to be complicated. It can just be an option that if you're tired, you can sit out and don't have to play the game. Really, stuff like that can make a big difference, because when there were times when I didn't play the game, I had some good conversations with other people who didn't want to play the game, and I actually made friends. It was awesome. All right, the last thing I want to talk about is in religious environments, a lot of times I think disability is conflated with sin, and I get it. Jesus healed a lot of people while he was on earth. But I have had a lot of times, even people saying it directly to my face, that if you're disabled, it's because you don't have enough faith. At the end of the day, my autism is a disability, not because I'm broken, but because I'm the only one like me in a lot of situations I go to. I describe it like this. Imagine that you had a pet horse, but you thought that horse was a cat. You would give the horse cat food, and then when it wouldn't eat it, you'd be concerned. You'd give it a cat tree, and when it wouldn't climb it, you'd be concerned. The horse would try to run for hours, and you'd be like, oh my goodness, my cat is broken. That's what it's like being autistic. God made me very different, but that doesn't mean he made me wrong. And it doesn't mean I need to fix me either. I'm living in a world where almost everyone is a cat. They think the same, function the same, and experience the world the same. Obviously, everyone's different, but compared to autism, it is the same. And then I'm over here with a different perspective, a different way of experiencing the world. And that's not bad. For example, when I was in college, I had the opportunity to talk multiple other students out of suicide. And part of that, I think, definitely has to do with my autism. I don't read emotions on the top very well because I'm autistic. I can't easily tell if someone's happy or just chill or sad, but I can see overwhelming patterns. Because I'm not focused on the happy, the sad, or whatever's on the surface, I can see what's deep below. Imagine that you have a new emotion every hour, but how you're doing mentally, that's something far deeper that doesn't change every hour. And I was able to see these people generally seeming low, and that's part of how I was able to intervene. And they're all alive, and as far as I know, doing well today. So that's a way that my autism allowed me actually to be more Christ-like and help these people. Because I'm autistic, I was able to do the Lord's work in a way that other people weren't able to. And I have a lot of stories like that, but that's a whole different video. At the end of the day, God made me different, and a lot of times it is super painful and rough. But we know from the Bible that there's a ton of people that God made different, and it was super painful and rough, and he had a really good reason for it. So I just need people to understand that just because I'm autistic doesn't mean I'm broken and you need to fix me. And it doesn't mean I need to fix me and I'm not trying hard enough. I think the church tends to think that because they love God and they focus so much on God, that they're immune to being prejudiced, just in general. But when you think you're immune to prejudice, you tend to be the most prejudiced one in the room. There's the autistic bluntness coming out. I'm not trying to be rude, but that's just the best way I can think to describe it. When you think you're immune to prejudice, you tend to be the most prejudiced one in the room. And that's been my experience with church. It's gotten to the point that for a while I couldn't even step in a church building without having an autistic meltdown, panic attack sort of thing, having flashbacks. physically trembling. It was difficult at times for me to drive past certain churches because I'd been treated not particularly well. So please remember that if someone seems off, if someone seems broken, if someone seems a mess, they might be exactly where God meant for them to be. And the reason they're a mess is because people are treating them like they're off and they're broken. Well, that really sums up everything I wanted to say. I made this video on impulse because my biscottis were taking too long to cook. And now I've been sitting here for 20 minutes and they're probably burned. So I'm going to leave now and hopefully save my biscottis. Have a wonderful day. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what video you would like to see next.